My name is Troy Vermillion, and I am the host of What the Tech. Now, if you haven't tuned in before, this is a podcast where we'll explore all things technology and how innovation and the evolution of technology are actually changing the business world. So, on today's episode, we'll be discussing the rapidly evolving future of conversational AI. This technology is quickly becoming more sophisticated and is poised to revolutionize the way we interact with technology on a daily basis. So, with conversational AI, we can now have realistic conversations with digital assistants that are now beginning to understand our emotions and even intentions. And so, this technology is still in its earlier stages, but it's evolving rapidly and holds tremendous potential for the future. So, if you like new tech and AI, just kick up your feet, sit back, relax, and enjoy the What the Tech podcast. All right, our next guest today is a technology professional in the cloud communication industry with over 25 years of contact center experience. But really, more than that, he's one of my closest friends and someone that I've always admired. Now, unlike many brainiacs, he uses his big brain not to intimidate people with his knowledge and experience, but to make the complex more fun and relatable to everyday people like you and me. Yes, he has a long list of incredible accomplishments in his resume, such as working at leading companies like Cisco and Avaya, as well as directing the entire Microsoft global network in over 18 countries. But that's not what he is known for in his closest circles. No, that is not what is actually most impressive about him, because for Steve specifically, we can count on him for his constant and never-ending supply of perspective humor, always taking each and every situation and finding the irony so that we can all see it and chuckle. So without further delay, now hailing as the director of channel at Swampfox Technologies, I'd like to welcome my friend, Stephen Faust, to the show. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for the colorful introduction. So I'll try to deliver on all those expectations you've set there.
I don't even think I said it high for you, to be completely frank. Like you, every time we get together, Steve, it's always a laugh fest for me. And maybe it's because I love to laugh. I'm sure that has something to do with it, but you always bring the funny and you always bring your unique perspectives. And I've never met anybody that can tell a story like you. About the oddest situations, and just to give your perspective that is usually just clearly like different than anybody else's. So, I hope people get a little bit of that today, but either way, I've really enjoyed, knowing you for the last, golly, is it almost 17, 18 years, something like that, right?
Man, it's a while. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure knowing you as well. Bi-directional here.
Yeah, and this conversation has been a long time coming. You've been supporting, the podcast and what I've been doing for a very long time, so I appreciate that. But I've also been excited, once we did schedule this, to have this conversation, especially, this new podcast is around things that you have a lot of expertise, being in tech for so long. So it's been a long time coming, Steve, and I'm excited to have you on the show with me. And I was curious, like, what excites you the most of finally being on the show with me?
Well, I get to experience it firsthand, and I like, to me, I feel like it's a great way, it's a great format to really just kind of, I don't know how you want to put it, let your hair down, have a casual conversation about different various subject matters specific to business. But I think, I feel like you've really touched on a great niche in the fact that, there's a lot of content out there, but I feel like what really makes it differentiate itself is it's really, it's kind of honest, and it kind of gets right to the heart of certain issues. And I think that's, people find value in that. And I think that, to me, that's the best form of, how should I say, content production, is when it's kind of just raw, and then just people can just kind of get to understand more about different sectors in a unbiased format. Because I feel like, as you're in sales just like I am, there's a plenty of people that want to immediately preach to you or shove a message down your throat, versus just informal kind of tech talks, that kind of thing. I think those are great, good way for people to educate themselves. I know I prefer learning or consuming information that way rather than just the static list of data points, right? And I think and we can also just, the synergies we get between each other and that you get between your other people you interview, I think are great too. A lot of value there.
I can just hear the subscribe bell ringing right now. So, and by the way, if you're new to the show, I would ask that, if you're enjoying the conversation, boop the like button and subscribe to the show to be notified. That always helps us to get the word out and what we're doing. So that we can talk to more people that, have expertise in and around technology, as well as founder stories, which we're all excited to hear about. So we're actually going to spend a little bit of time, Steve, getting to know you a little bit better, because I know you really well, which is a good thing, I think, arguably, right? But so I want to ask you a series of questions that will give some people an idea of your unique perspective that I've come to know and love. And so I've got some burning questions that I have for you. And I'll preface this by saying there's no guardrails or bumpers on the lane. I want you to express yourself freely. Is that cool?
Good. Oh, I was going to here. The people might not know Megan, our friend Megan. She
Yes.
gave this to me. Your word made me think of it. Like she gave me this plaque.
Oh, geez. Yeah. The lovable know-it-all. It reminds me, anytime we play board games with you, Steve, it's all about like, hey, everybody likes to just pick on Steve because he really is the smartest person in the room. And they like to pick on him because he always has very elaborate reasons why you shouldn't be going after him and you should be going after somebody else if you're picking on him. And they're all great, but that doesn't matter to us because we find it hilarious to pick on him.
Zero impact on the game.
At last, and everybody's attacking Steve.
Nice.
It's funny. Okay, so here we go. And these are just completely absurd questions. So answer them as, absurdly as I ask them. Okay. All right. On a scale of 1 to 10, Steve, how would you rank yourself versus your 10 closest friends if you were to get into a pillow fight? And please explain your answer.
Well, considering you're on that list, I think there's no doubt I would receive some severe punishment to the cranium. But I would say, man, I almost feel like right now when I think of my top 10, I'm cherry picking the weak ones to give myself a better score. I would say, I consider some children friends, right? I would destroy them. I don't know. I guess I'd give myself maybe 7. There you go. I feel like I would hold my own pretty much to a certain degree, and then it would fall off. I remember I did a Renaissance festival where you get on those logs and the person across, you straddle them and then you kind of whack. And I remember I held that position a long time. Now, I'm not going to say there weren't some younger folks getting on that log, but I held it for like a good while, long enough that I did not get defeated. I eventually gave up. I think the crowd may have been getting a little angst, like, hey, give it up to someone else, stop beating half the Renaissance fair. But I enjoyed it. So,
Now, do you credit that to your thigh strength?
Good question. I think, I benefit from a high torso, right? And I think especially when you're swinging, and also I have broad shoulders. So I feel like, you put some physics into the mechanics of it. I feel like I can definitely bring the heat, when it comes to it, right? Ultimately I feel like there's still some people that you would have me on reach, almost like in a boxing match. So you'd be hitting me while I'm just flailing my pillow. Unless I got like a really long pillow, I guess, or over the top structure.
Well, a body pillow, right?
Yeah, something like that.
That's great. All right, good answer. All right, next question. You ready? All right. So if the toilet paper is really low, but not completely out, Steve, do you actually take the time to replace it, or do you leave that for somebody else?
Where is my wife in this conversation? Because I feel if there's an offender, I mean, she will make an art out of the dead rolls before she replaces them. It's like some point she's trying to prove. I'm just like, what have I done to get to this stage? But no, if it's low, I will not replace it. But if it's out, I will replace it. I feel her and my children are just like, how long can we make it go? We will put the new roll. We will never use it. We will hold off to make him do it.
They're pulling off like half sheets to,
I'm telling you, or they basically get the new roll and we'll just set it near the toilet, wherever. and just use it. It just go forever. They will never put it back. It's like they're like, that thing, that's a lot of effort. I'm never going to use it.
I would say that I do have a tendency to like go ahead and just change it because I'm just sitting there, right?
Yeah. It's a valid point. I like, to me, I at least keep an eye on the stock levels too, because we especially, if you got bathrooms spread out, because my daughter has no problem running between rooms with no pants. I'm like, stop, like we can put more, we got more. Just give me a second to replenish.
Actually, that brings me to my next question, Steve. So your kids are hilarious and you have such a good time with them. And so I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure you've got something juicy and maybe one for both of them, because they're both fantastic. What is one of the strangest or funniest things one of your two kids has ever asked you?
Oh man, I almost feel like a new record is getting set by the day. What have they asked me before? Oh, I know what he asked me the other day that Mariah had it cracking up. He said, he started off saying, why aren't you the boss? And I'm like, the boss of what? Right? Like, I almost felt like that was an indictment. Like, I'm not the boss of anything. Right? Like, and then it was basically like C-level is what he was getting at. Like, why aren't you the CEO? And again, I was like, that's a long and sordid story. Like, I think it was actually CTO, because he was asking me stuff about, well, who's the head of whatever? And I said, normally it'll be like a CTO or something like that. And I said, that's a role I've at least had, in an interim basis, but, not sustained. But I was like, it's a longer story. I feel like anytime you get a question like that from a child, you kind of have to phrase your words correctly. Because I'm like, sometimes the most qualified people don't go to the roles because of something called politics, right? Like you have to be very delicate about, there's a lot more who you know, how they know you, like network connectivity. So again, that's a tough concept to explain to him. But that one I thought was kind of funny, how he just out of nowhere was like, why aren't you the boss? And I was like, okay, great. Like I thought for a minute he meant at the house. Then I was gonna be like, well, we do things,
Wait, you're not the boss at the house?
Yeah, sure. Let's go with that.
I think that's a funny one. You've actually shared quite a few funny ones on line before. Like one that you were sharing is, I think you were walking through some sort of store or something like that, and Logan asked you. There was an old school. I think it was a Bugs Bunny cartoon on. And he asked you the question.
Yeah, Yogi the Bear. Was that the one?
Yeah.
Or no, which one was it?
It might have been Yogi the Bear. Yeah.
Oh yeah, where Yogi had a gun to the back of his head and he was driving, right? Yeah. Like, that was a great one. He's like, this seems extreme for a children's cartoon. And I was like, yeah, Hanna-Barbera, back in the day, they didn't give a dang.
Yeah.
It had some gangster had taken Yogi hostage. But yeah, he had the gun right to the back of his head and Yogi's driving him around, and then apparently Yogi outsmarts him. I don't think it ended with his death, but I was just like, whoa, this is extreme. Like, and a funny aside to that is, if you've ever seen the very beginning of Pinocchio, I don't know how much you recall from that movie. Geppetto wakes up. This is, I think, when Pinocchio is first coming to life or something like that. Geppetto wakes up. He has a gun. Immediately upon waking up, he has a gun in his hand, right?
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, exactly. You go back and watch the first part of that movie, as I watched it with the kids that long ago, and I was like, how bad was his neighborhood, right? And he was an old timey. It was like a pirate gun, with the muzzle and all that. I was like, man, this is a kid's movie about a puppet, and he wakes up, he's instantly strapped. Like, just looking for who to kill. Geppetto, just he's from the streets, yo.
Did you watch that because the new one came out and you watched it and you're like, this is no, we have to go back.
Yeah, well, no, I think just in general, we were almost trying to prime the pump before we went to Disneyland, and we're like, they haven't actually been exposed to that many characters, right? Like their Disney experience is more what I call the modern. Like, I almost want to say that Lion King was probably the oldest one they had seen at that point. So we were trying to introduce them to all that, like Cinderella, Pinocchio. And it was interesting. Their attention span, not so much. They got like halfway through Pinocchio and we're like, they're good. Like when he goes underwater, they're like, we're fine.
Yeah, no, there's something about new cartoons that are so different that, like the violence, we got used to the violence. That was like the big thing. Now it's really the crude humor, pointed towards parents. It's like they're like trying to make us enemy, public enemy number one with their kids.
I was watching. It just was on the background of a restaurant we were at yesterday. It was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and it was the original one, with Gene Hackman, I think. And I kept, one of the things I thought was, what kind of parent goes on a tour of a factory, and I'll go ahead and give them two. After the first two children drop off, like one of them turns huge and one of them gets stuck in a pipe. How do the other parents justify keeping on that tour, right? Like, oh, don't worry, Johnny. Those are just two other kids. It's not going to happen again, right? What parent wouldn't immediately be like, I'm getting off this train of death, right?
Right.
But they just blaze ahead, whatever.
Yeah,
it's just happy-go-lucky.
That's just normal. That's every day here.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like every parent in Willy Wonka I'm calling a monster right now. Not the first one. I guess the first one I'll give them credit because they didn't know this horrible things were going to befall their children. But everyone that kept on that tour, terrible parent. Terrible parent.
Another indictment. All right. So last question for you. For those of you that do not know Steve is a very picky eater, and I've seen this firsthand. And so I have a question that'll probably likely make him gag in his mouth a little bit, maybe even cringe a little. So I wanted to ask a question on would you rather, and see what your thoughts are on this. So would you rather eat vanilla ice cream with soy sauce on top? Which I think is, or would you rather have a banana grilled cheese sandwich?
I almost feel like you didn't ask how I would eat it. So, I might be like, just kind of move the bowl like that and then eat from the top. But I'd be like, I stuck to the letter of what you requested.
Always trying to circumvent the system here, Steve.
I'd say banana grilled cheese just because I feel like it wouldn't be pleasant, but I feel like soy sauce, I'm only used to it in the context of sushi. So I feel like anything else would just be just a travesty. But yeah, it also makes you remember those fear factors where they made the kids eat the nasty stuff. And then,
the fear factors. I was watching a bunch of those, and it really is horrible what they make them eat. That's what would get me. I would be able to do everything else, and then they'd be like, eat this disgusting eyeball. Like they had like sheep eyeballs on there that these people were like downing, and can you imagine? No, and they probably stank.
I remember when I was late teens, early 20s. I was with a group of people, and they thought it would be fun to just bet each other. You won't eat this, or you won't eat that, and the amounts involved, looking back on it, were so pitiful. Like $20, which I would be like, no. But I guess back then $20 was a lot of money. But I remember one of them was some kind of bug. I want to say maybe a cricket or something. It had a pincher on it though, and I remember he's like, "Yeah, I'll do it." So he throws it in his mouth, and I could literally see his cheek getting pulled because the thing was pinching him. Was pulling.
No.
I was like, oh.
Oh, jeez.
And he's just trying to muscle it down. So my standards have definitely surpassed that point. I guess maybe for $1 million, I might change my mind. But
Fear Factor was only $50K.
Yeah. Nowadays it's laughable. I don't understand how some of those game shows stay in business. Where it's just like you want a showcase for, or what was one of them? There was a competition I saw the other day. It was the mullet competition. Once a year, they have a mullet competition. And the grand prize was like $2,000. And I'm like, you have to fly there, right? And I'm guessing a room. I don't think it's an in and out kind of deal. I'm like, are they really going for the prize money? Like, I don't understand. Some of those contests, I feel like there's no ROI. Even if you win, it's just like, what is the point?
Well, you got to think about the person who would have a mullet, right? It's all about bragging rights. Like you're like, hey, I have the best mullet.
Yeah, look
at
this. Oh man, you got a little plaque, mullet of the year.
Oh, great. Well, I appreciate you humoring me. It's always fun to kind of chat with you and laugh with you. There is a part of this show where we actually talk about real tech stuff, and I think we've reached that part. But I'm sure you'll still continue to humor me with little bits of your perspective, which is always funny. So
Sure.
So let me ask this. So jumping into voice, I mean, so much has changed. With voice recognition. You've been in contact center for a long time, and conversational AI, right? So much has been happening. So why don't we start with that, and you maybe providing some baseline for where things are at today and what's kind of coming in the future.
Yeah, sure. So in general, I think voice, it's almost like saying the cloud these days. It could mean a lot of
Right.
things. Voice in this context, if we're trying to say, okay, what are some more modern conversations around voice, you would start with your speech enabled devices, like an Alexa. Which I feel like it was one of the predecessors, but obviously, you have Siri,
Right.
you have, Google. And I think those came about in conjunction with what was happening with smartphone technology. But I feel like that underpinning of speech recognition had been around way before those, but those are the ones that kind of bubbled, kind of to the forefront.
Right.
And I think at this point, again, talking about where things are going from where they've been, some of the real advantages, I would say, if you're looking at the technology, is how accurate is it and what can you do with it? And the reason people like Amazon and Apple and Google have been surpassing companies that way outdated them is really just because, again, their user base, their sample size is so huge, right? Like 𝗔𝗯ance is a company that was at one of the forefronts. I think 𝗔𝗯ance, and then there was I'm trying to think back, SpeechWorks. There were companies doing it. I remember meeting a speech data scientist in Boston before I was even in grad school, which is like 2008. Before that, it was like 2006. So, I mean, that's been around a long time. There's been people literally with that in their title. But the problem is you can develop this great thing, but it's more about how are you going to improve it over time. And let's say 𝗔𝗯ance, even in their height, had 10,000 customers. Well, that's a drop in the bucket compared to Amazon, right? So those devices, I think, not just because Amazon had better developers, but they had so many more people using it, and then they could analyze what was happening and then improve that perpetual improvement. That's a big part of it. Even when you buy this technology today, I don't care who you buy from, there's a tuning stage, and the tuning is to make sure that what's getting said is producing the results you want, and like it's understanding correctly. And with anything, like some of the things you have to overcome are like jargon. So if you took one piece of speech software and put it in with a medical practice, and you put another one in with, let's say, someone that does like hotel chains or whatever, they're all going to use different acronyms, right? And those are things that have to get tuned because we use them in everyday speech, but there's tons of times people, like, I'll use an acronym, they won't know what it means. The solution's the same way. So one of the reasons, my point there is that these solutions from those three companies, it's just their user base are real high. And now where the market is going is, okay, beyond just asking it the weather or maybe giving it some command, like turn off my lights, can I use that as another modality, which is kind of a fancy way of saying, how am I going to communicate with this business? Originally, how would you communicate with a business? You'd walk in the front door, and then it became, I'm going to call their 800 number, right? And then as things progressed, we got to the point where, okay, I'm going to send them an email. Fast forward, I'm going to SMS. I'm going to send them something on Facebook. I'm going to tweet, right? I'm going to use some form of social media. That social media trend was happening around, I want to say the first time, that was Avaya was one of the first that was able to route that to the contact center. But that, again, was like 2006, I want to say. Maybe a little bit before that, 2005. Heck, I have a social media in the contact center for dummies book that is definitely 2005-ish genre. Yeah. So, and I think what it really comes down to is, if you take it all away, is what's the user experience, right? Like, we want to make it where I no longer am forced to communicate with the business on their terms. I'm going to communicate with them on my terms. And my terms can look totally different depending on a number of factors. The technology I have access to, what I'm familiar with, right? Like, I guarantee you, my parents have never tried to communicate with a business over social media. It's never happened, right? Does that mean it's wrong? No, but you have to understand, who's contacting you over what method, and then how would they like to interact with you. But using my parents again as an example, they do have an Amazon device. They talk to, for random things. But if you told my parents, look, instead of calling your doctor to reschedule, what if you talked to your Amazon device and said, Amazon, using them as an example, they have what are called skills, and skills are really just a way to layer in another business. So let's say my parents are working with MD Anderson. MD Anderson will have a skill on the Amazon device, and they'll say, MD Anderson, reschedule appointment. And then it'll say, who are you rescheduling an appointment with? And then maybe it gives you a list. Dr. Smith, Jones, whatever. Dr. Smith, okay. Yeah, I show you have an appointment for blah, blah, blah. When would you like to reschedule? So today, you're familiar with, automated systems within a contact center that allow you to do that. It's more of, I don't want to even have to go look up your number, because Lord knows, just using MD Anderson as an example, they probably have 500 numbers. So what happens? You call in, you listen to that crazy IVR, you get put on hold, someone answers, they're not the right person, they transfer. It's a bad experience, right? So it's more about, how can I get them what they want, which is, maybe a rescheduling, access to some type of information. How can I get them there? How can I do it efficiently and do it on their terms, right? Whatever those terms are. And I think that's where companies are really trying to bridge that gap. And if you look at the trends of, let's say, voice sales. So, and Amazon ran a commercial, man, years ago, that had a celebrity, and he was ordering socks. He was like, oh, I'm like basically he was in some kind of drunken hangover, but he's like, order me more socks, because, whatever happened. At the time, I think it was just more seen as a novelty. But if you look at the sales, where people are literally legitimately saying, buy this. And a lot of times you can imagine it's low ticket items like staples, buy rice, buy whatever, normally it's not a plane, but they've been going up and up and up and up and up. If you look at them, people just literally saying a command. They don't even want to look at the description. They just want you to order it and buy it. I don't want to have to walk over to my computer and do it. And I think if you think about it, a lot of people are familiar with typing to do searches, but realistically, it would be our preference if we could get it to work correctly, right? Because if you have
Absolutely.
a lot of things going on, sometimes I feel like that the skill is finding the exact keywords to type to get what you want in the results, versus just having a natural conversation. And I think especially, as you're just walking around your house, you don't want to have to just beeline it back to a keyboard and have a computer, because, most of the time we leave them on for convenience, but realistically that's adding overhead, right? You'd rather just have a conversation. And especially with simple things like, I know one of the examples that was at this conference was somebody saying that during the supply chain crisis, which is still ongoing, it was a shoe company, and they had a ton of people like, where the heck are my shoes, right? And they were just like, can we find a way to not have them call in and tie up our lines to ask where the shoes are? Because we know they're late, but it's basically 80% of our call volume is people asking about where their freaking shoes are. So they made it a skill, and you could say, hey, and again, I don't want to name drop them exactly, hey, shoe company, where are my shoes? And they would, especially the Echo Show, they would show you the tracking information in real time, just bam. And if you think about it, that's so much more efficient, because first off, you could do that from any room. You don't have to have a computer. It would immediately tell you, and again, your problem's solved. And especially with larger corporations, looking at the cost benefit analysis is huge, because every minute you're on an 800 number, you're spending money. Every minute you're talking to an agent, you're spending their money. Like they want to avoid that at all costs. So they're looking for more creative ways to get that out there. SMS is another one that's really blown up, because it started out where they would send you like a dental reminder, but now SMS has really gone to where it's two-way communication. You can have an SMS menu, just like you would in a normal IVR. It would say, do you want this or this? You'd say one. Okay. It would do a lookup, give us your account number. Okay. Just like you would do anywhere else. It's fully immersive. And then they obviously layered on, some form of AI chat bot, which again is getting progressively smarter and smarter, those kind of things.
Yeah. So I've got a lot of questions about what you shared there. So what I wanted to understand was how much of this technology right now is proprietary to just different companies, and how much is actually being shared to kind of push things forward.
Yeah, that's a big concern, is open source versus closed source. Apple, I know for a fact is a company that's notorious for playing both sides of the fence. I mean, heck, most people don't even remember the first iPhone. There was no concept of an app store, because they had it all in house, and they were going to keep it that way until somebody was like, hey, you're going to be so much more successful if you open that up to outside development. Right. So you think they would have learned, but they're notorious for one of the ones that it's not easy to integrate a solution. The most open source one there is Amazon right now.
Really?
But Google, is coming around more, but they're the ones that, it's very much like, how much money do you think you can make by keeping it closed sourced, but then everybody has to wait on your development, versus how much money you're going to give up by making it open source, but you're going to become more popular. Right. And then are you going to earn it back? And I feel like some companies, they're very much on the fence about how much they're going to open up and what that's going to look like. But I would say, yeah, I mean, they're the leader right now. Are they going to stay that way? It's hard to say. I really hope they all do more to open it up. I mean, this conversation, I'm just name dropping those few companies. It's far and wide. Like if you think of like in an automobile, when you hit the button for help, right? North Star or whatever the different ones are, all those systems are trying to get linked to, voice technology in some form or fashion, where like OnStar, for example, like that, where again, you're talking to some type of system. It's able to answer questions. If it needs to bring on an agent, it can, and I think some of the ones I feel like are clever are the ones where it's a hybrid, meaning if you ask it a question and it's 70% sure of the answer, it'll go bug an agent, but it won't bug them with everything. It'll just say, he said this, I'm going to respond with that. Do you agree? And the agent will just say yes. And then it'll keep on trucking. It won't just blind transfer it over the agent because it didn't hit a threshold. And then the systems can learn. They can say, okay, out of the 10 times I hit up an agent on this question, 9 times out of 10, they all said this is the right answer. So now I'm going to feel more confident about my answer. This is in the machine's perspective.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of the open source, it's one of those things where as you stand back as a consumer, it makes perfect sense. Everybody should be able to integrate to everybody. We all would benefit, businesses and consumers alike, but they're very much like, it's my IP and how much of it I'm going to allow, for what purpose, it's very dicey, right? Like, again, they almost feel like once they open it up, there's like no turning back. It's kind of like Pandora's box. So they can be very dicey about it, but I think they're starting to see the benefits of more open source communication, and how that can benefit other systems. I mean, it's interesting. Google, they have more tools that you could immediately build into, like we do that, at Swampfox, we leverage their speech services for different things. They have a deeper portfolio than Amazon, but I feel like Amazon's easier to do business with in terms of they basically go out of their way to make everything open, like those skills I talk about. Google, not so much. They'll let you buy their tools, but making them open for people to integrate with, like in the shoe example, they're less into that. But if you want to bring them in for, some advanced, let's say, translation services, or you want to bring them in to do, some advanced speech enablement, they're for it. And I think they've basically exposed, how much, like when you're a company, you really care about like what, especially for something like that, because it's not like you buy a name brand or something like that. Behind the scenes, I want someone just to be able to pull off the job. And if the job is, when I say blah blah blah, you route me to there, I don't care who's doing it, right? And a company like Google, they're more than happy to do that on the cheap, so to speak, like charge you very little, right, to enable that, versus a company that's all they do. Like, again, I'll say Nuance. Like Nuance is, they live and die by that. If that product went away, they wouldn't have a company. So they're going to charge you a lot for it because that's the only way they make margin. Google is all about, they'll throw that in. I'm not going to say for free, but for pretty cheap, because they want to sell you on everything else. So they kind of see that as an entry point, and then they're going to upsell you on the whole stack. Like, oh, did you know we have data services? Did you know we have, you name it. I mean, if you go to their product catalog, they're similar to Amazon. Like, it'll never end the amount of things they can sell you. So for them, if they sell you one or two things just to get their foot in the door, they're happy with it. Versus, again, companies like Nuance, they can't do that. They can't give you their core product, right? Like, they have to make money.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So you already shared kind of who's doing a great job with a lot of these things right now. I'm curious, what advancements are you most excited about? So like, kind of next gen, upgrades to voice and voice recognition.
Yeah. Another couple of names I'll throw in there as well is like Success KPI is one we do a lot of business with that we really like, because to me, there's value in voice, but then you got to look at, okay, what are the other parts of this customer journey, right? I think being able to do really advanced data analysis is a big component of it. And then with that data analysis, then you can do a lot of smart things, like in terms of the behaviors that the customers are experiencing, how long they wait, where you send them, what agents they talk to, if they get an automated callback, like what we do, right? Do they have a way to mix the modality? So I talk to you speech here, but then you send me an SMS that I respond to on so can they jump between them, right? That's a big piece of it. So I think the voice, voice to me, I see is definitely rapidly evolving, but it's one part of the whole enchilada. And I feel the orchestration of that is important because you can always find best in breed at each one.
Right.
Like you might be able to find some guy who's the king of, databases, but they suck at all the rest, right? And you can't. To me, that's a terrible solution. To Frankenstein the best of each one of these five. It's really you want to find out who can bring it together. So I like what they're able to. That's why we partner with them. We feel like they're really good at completing that picture. But in terms of where I see it going next, I think it's very much going to start becoming where the keyboard is going to be obsolete to some degree. Where it can get to that stage. I think that's where you just naturally will walk over to your computer. Today, like heck, on my computer, if I hold it down, the Siri thing will come up. But she performs, in my view, very basic tasks. Right? I would never push her and say, "Open Outlook, read my." Like I would never just completely just start dictating my day. Like today, I just bunch of mouth clicks or whatever. But I think what you'll start to see is I go to a company's website, let's say at like Walgreens, and instead of waiting for you to do all this stuff, it'll just be anticipating that you want to talk to it, and you'll go to Walgreens. And then, whatever you want to do there, like the interaction has started the moment you go to the webpage via speech. And you say, look, I want to look up my prescription. And it already knows you because of speech recognition. There's a voice biometrics. It authenticates you. And it says, Steven, you have these 3 prescriptions ready. What time are you going to come pick them up? All right, I'm going to come pick them up at 2:00. And then you could just straight up start talking to it more. What sales do you have going on? Okay, we got a discount on blah, 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 whatever. And then so that way you're asking it for the information rather than you just having to scroll and find it, because I think at the end of the day, people expect a lot from these businesses. And because of that, they provide a lot of info, but then it becomes a needle in the haystack problem where you're like, all right, all that info is out there, but finding what I want is kind of tedious. Like the other day, I wanted to know what time Chick-fil-A stopped serving breakfast. And I, try to, today we just Google it, but I think that would be a great example is that you would just walk up to your smart enabled device and say, what time does Chick-fil-A stop serving? And I think it can do today, but I think it's just going to start becoming more and more, and you're not going to notice a distinction. Like you're not going to feel like they're two environments. You're going to treat it all as one, homogenous solution. Right. I think that's definitely where I see it going.
So you think you already said the keyboard, and that's because voice to text is getting so good that it's going to predictably, fix your grammar. It's going to predictably, be able to do things that we just weren't capable of doing before. And you're seeing, platforms like Grammarly fix that sort of stuff, and so forth. But you're saying one giant homogenous system that includes voice, that includes text. It really includes probably video and everything else, like in one kind of seamless format. And it's whatever application is necessary for the best outcome, is what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And well, I feel like consumers, they don't want to, like today, a good example is when you have to join a web conference and then it's like, oh, I don't have web conference X, so I got to go download it again. I feel in the future, they're going to try to get away from that. Almost like there's a ton of password programs today because you don't have to remember every single password. So they created a program that remembers your passwords and it injects them like every time something asks for your password. The same thing I see happening with voice and with conferencing too, where it's like, I want to work with you. Okay, you've got this, and the previous company I worked for was trying to bridge that as well. I don't care that you're using Teams and I'm using Zoom. We're going to find a happy middle, and I'm not going to worry that you're using something else because it's getting orchestrated. That orchestration I feel is still kind of in its infancy because everyone wants to force you onto their Kool-Aid, right? But I think at the end of the day, consumers, they don't care. Like SMS is a perfect example of that. If you could imagine how nasty SMS would be if it's like, oh, well, I don't have Verizon, so therefore you can't text me because I have T-Mobile. Like nobody would tolerate that, but we tolerate it with a bunch of other modalities, right? Just because it's like we don't really know the alternative. I definitely see that going away and kind of normalizing because I think just understanding where consumers are heads at. Their goal is to communicate. They're not as stuck on how that's happening. Now, obviously, people are going to try to sell you, I got better features, but if you can get them to that core piece, I think that's going to fit most of the, what you could call use cases.
Well, I find it interesting when you talk about SMS because, like, Android and Apple have this funny thing that they do, or they, like on Apple, they make your text green if it comes from an Android, I think, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And they just give you anytime you react to somebody's text on Android that's Apple, if they react to it, it's like liked, and then it just like gives you your entire text. It could be like a really long text, and it literally says liked, and then it quotes the text, which is the stupidest looking thing in the world. And I think they're doing that just to kind of, again, kind of passive aggressively say, hey, we're better.
Yeah. Well, I feel like they didn't want to make it where you had no functionality between the platforms,
right.
But they also wanted to say, hey, look, we can do more. But that's another example of where they could open it up if they wanted. Those companies could get together, but they want you to see advantages to staying on their system. And that's always going to be a battle in terms of, hey, like that's what cracks me up when they always say the customer's number one. It's like, to a certain point, right?
Yeah.
Like they're number one as long as we make money, right? Like, or we think it's profitable. After that, their opinion's not that important.
Your customer's always number one when you don't have any.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So how would you kind of quantify the impact of voice specifically on kind of the global economic level? Because, I don't know, are other countries, leveraging voice as much as we are here in the US? And, as that continues to progress, a lot of times, and I know you've experienced this, like, a lot of the voice, that we use right now is replacing like overseas, call centers and things like that. So I'm curious what you think is going to happen on that level.
Oh yeah. I mean, I got a couple things to share. One is, I want to say a huge breakthrough in translation services is in Europe. That's why, most people you meet in Europe, they speak more than one language versus here. We don't, how should I say, we're not as, because out of necessity, right? So for there, it'd be very common for a company to operate across borders, and they don't really want to have to stock a call center with people that speak Italian, French, German, Spanish. Like they don't want to do that because that adds complexity. They'd much rather have it, and I've seen this in both forms, which is really impressive. One is I send you a text, SMS, or web chat in German, and it translates it to whatever language that agent speaks. And then when they respond back, it translates it again. But I've even seen it in basically the voice conversation, it's pretty intense. That's not as common, but it can be done where they speak it and then the system, again, Google Voice will attempt this. It's not perfect, but I feel like it's amazing how much it can actually keep up pretty good. I'd say it's never going to be like simultaneous translation at the UN kind of level, but that is a big place you see it internationally. Less so here, but that's a big thing you see overseas. Another thing I saw showcased just recently, this was at CCW, which is Contact Center Week. They had a company that had just piloted basically no accent removal. And that one was taken off huge. And that's another voice breakthrough. I'd never seen it. And they had this guy, I feel bad for him because, he probably didn't want this starring role, but he had like, if there was an Indian accent on 1 to 10 and 10 being the worst you've ever heard, this guy was a 15, right?
Right.
Like I honestly didn't even know he spoke English. He was like, I don't want to be disparaging to other cultures, but it was terrible accent, right? And they were like, okay, whatever his name was, Habib, go ahead and with your, talk. And he started talking to him. It's so great to be here, whatever, in his broken accent. And then they had this little button where they clicked on the filter, just basically normalize, they didn't say Americanize, I guess that offend people, but just, it said normalize his accent. And I swear to you, he spoke at that exact moment, he spoke the most perfect accent free you've ever heard. And then they turned it back off, and then you heard him and then they turned it back. That to me was huge game changer, right? Because, for a long time it was like, well, we can get the workforces at a cheaper rate, but we're going to have to deal with people who are like, what are you saying? What are you saying?
Right.
Versus with that, you could employ just about anybody. I was so blown away. Now they said it wasn't for every accent. They weren't that advanced yet, but it was specifically India. I was like, man, that company, the moment I saw them, I was like, where can I buy their stock? Because that thing I was like is going to kill.
Yeah, so we'll have to talk about that because that sounds earth shattering as far as technology goes. Because I can't tell you how many times, even in the deep South, man, you're like, what did he say? What did he say? You need somebody to really interpret. It's not just it's not just the sayings that they use, but
yeah. But the colloquialisms, but also the manner in which they speak. Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I remember I had a manager who was trying to test out these speech-enabled Spanish prompts, and she does not speak Spanish. In fact, she had a really heavy accent from the Bronx,
Right.
And I remember it was very simple, like uno, dos, like for 1, 2, saying it. And I remember her coming to me and go, Steven, it doesn't understand ocho. So she'd hold up the ocho. And it'd be like, I'm sorry, say that again. Ocho. I'm like, Liz, no one understands you. Okay, it's not the technology. I can't fix that. There is no ocho. Like, whatever that is. I was like, there's nothing to do here, right? It's not, a native speaker would get past it. Ocho, and then it would move on. Whatever you're doing. It's not. That's why you don't have someone with a broadcast pretend to speak Spanish to test some prompts, right?
Yeah. Well, so we've all had those experiences, horrible contact center experiences. So I was hoping you could just make me feel better about where things are changing, because that's kind of your day to day. Like your customers are using voice every single day. There's some things that you were sharing with me that are actually pretty unique to what you do. So, kind of talk to me about like where specifically for your industry, where things are at, and some of the cool things that you're doing there today. And you're kind of working with the big boys on. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are an extension of one of the big boys, so maybe share that a little bit on what you're doing for them.
Yeah, sure. And another thing I would just add is I'm definitely not one that would sit here and say that automation is the answer to everything. I remember watching, I don't know, it was probably another version of some kind of technical talk where this guy goes, you ever walk into a restroom and it's the towel feeder's automatic, the hand dryer's automatic, soap dispenser's automatic, the water's automatic, toilet's automatic. And it sounds great, but then when you actually go and do it, and then they're not working and you're just shaking it, or you're just like, come on, like you're just like doing this like 100 different ways to get it. That I feel is a very good analogy to what users experience, is that there's, they were sold, they being company, let's say the big one we were talking about, were sold this amazing AI story, automation story where customers will never need to talk to an agent because everything's automated and you're going to have the smartest computer on the planet talking to them. And agents are just inferior. And then it's like the actual person's like, ocho or whatever. The computer doesn't understand them, right? It's just totally confused that it's shooting out things and you're just like frustrated. You're like, oh, this stupid thing, right? Because I feel like that's the problem is here's what they were sold and here's what it's capable of doing. And there's a gap. But yeah, I mean, so what we do for large customers is we come alongside them. I'd say, one of the main things that's different about us is we're not a rip and replace company. It's very easy to sit down with a customer, look at what they've bought and say, oh, these things are nice, but we've got way better stuff. So this stuff you have, get rid of it and then go with our stuff and you'll see, the savings or whatever, that's an easy story to sell. But I feel like where that story falls apart is when you have systems that took a long time to build, right? Like if someone has a contact center and they have, 5 scripts and 20 agents who only speak English, how hard is it to move them from system A to B? Not really difficult, right? You got to move 5 scripts and they all speak English. They're in 2 queues. Easy deal, right? But if a company has invested, let's say, I don't know, 10,000 man hours just designing the menus, like where should I dig or new service or legal, and then it interacts, you got to imagine you've got the system that's talking to you, but it's got hooks into, let's say, more than a dozen. I mean, I've seen some as high as 20 different backend systems, Salesforce, you name it, ServiceNow, Microsoft Dynamics, it goes on and on and on the list of what it can be talking to, right? Do you think it's easy to move off that platform to a new platform? No. They've invested so much effort. And here's another thing is no matter what you sell them, they're definitely horse trading, meaning they're going to have some new features they don't have today, but there's not a like for some of the other features. So then they're having to decide, do I care more about these new features than I do about the ones I'm going to have to give up, right? They're having to do this, and how much, and also what's really tough for them is how much is that going to piss off their customers? Because, okay, you've improved,
Yep.
and again, sometimes you've improved the lives of 20% of the base, but you've pissed off another 40. So what we do is we come in and say, look, we're not about getting rid of the system. The reason we exist is because people don't want to get rid of it. They want to add value. You know, how do you add value? Well, it's software is the shortest answer. We have software. That software it improves your contact center. Now, how does it improve your contact center? Well, you know, we have package applications like, you know, one of our more notable ones is First in Line. First in Line, what is that? It's a callback solution. What is a callback solution? Well, if you've ever been on hold and it says, you know, your wait time is, you know, 10 days, would you like us to call you back? You're like, sure. Okay. You have it, the system call you back, and you can hang up. Now, again, even amongst people that offer this service, you know, I would definitely say we're best in breed. Well, why is that? Right. Again, not to get too technical, but it's one of those things that sometimes you can offer a callback to someone that's on hold, but you can also through your website allow them to schedule a time for the company to call you. You know, Apple has one of those interfaces, for example, to say, look, Apple, you know, I have a problem, but I can't talk right now. I want you to call me, you know, tomorrow at 2. Okay, that's when it's going to call you. That's a scheduled callback. And we also have the ability for agents that are talking to someone, especially in sales is a common thing. Well, you know, why don't you just call me back later? I'm busy right now. And you're like, okay, when? Okay, you know, Friday, 3 o'clock, I'm going to call you back. And then they're like, okay, that's where the agent schedules it. But you can also make it where, okay, you say, tell the customer, hey, I'm going to call you back, but you only offer times where your call volumes are low, right? Now that's pretty strategic because I think you're at that point saying, look, I've got a lot of manpower that's not being utilized, and I want to direct my busy times to where I've got more workforce available to them. So that's another advantage. And then again, I think another thing we do really well is, since we are an autonomous, not just a piece of software that you just, you know, install and run, we're an autonomous solution, like a managed service solution where you can log in to our, you know, device. You can look at reports, you can make administrative changes, and you can see for yourself very clearly the benefits you're getting from the system, right? Because sometimes I feel like some of the benefits can be kind of soft benefits in the fact that, okay, my customer experience has improved. How much is that worth? You know, I don't know, right? But in real time, if you can say, look, here's how many minutes these people were not in queue on hold, you know, burning your 800 minutes. Okay, that's a real dollar value. Okay, here's your CSAT scores. You know, here's how much they went up by since we came on, right? Here is, you know, again, workforce efficiency, right? Your average number of calls handled by an agent went up X amount, right? Because they, during their lulls, they no longer were sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They were handling calls because we were able to. So we do a really good job of being able to show you the value that system provides. And I think there's also, you know, this is where science meets art. If you don't have, again, a really good understanding of what makes a valuable user interaction, right? It's almost like the same concept of, okay, can you program your VCR? For those that don't know what a VCR is, but back in the day, that used to be a running joke, is program your VCR to record a show. Right. You almost had to have a PhD. Why? Because the user interface was such a pain. It was this small screen that had little buttons, and to make it do something complex was a huge pain, right? It's the same thing, like saying, okay, we can offer callback, but if you make it arduous for the consumer, like, hey, hold your phone upside down and hit they don't want to do it, right? So our whole thing is understanding from their vantage point what would make a good user experience. Like, you know, automatically detecting their number, saying, you know, would you like a callback now, as opposed to just presenting them with, like, to me, that's again where, if you've ever called in somewhere and they give you 9 options, followed by 9 options, followed by 9 options, and then you're like, I don't remember. Like, that's someone that doesn't understand the user experience. Like, did you build a great system? Well, you could say yes, because it offers them everything you have, but the experience is terrible. Right. And I think that's one thing I wanted to make sure came across on the talk today is, it's been proven time and time again, even though most companies, I feel like this just goes over their head, is that customers will pay more. Even in, you know, dire economic times, they will pay more if they get a better experience. They value that. They will pay a premium and they will stick with a company if you give them a higher experience. And the reverse is also true. If you treat them like trash, I don't care how cheap your cable service is or how cheap whatever, they don't want to have to deal with that, right? To them, they'll pay more for that better experience, right? And I think that's the company's job to really sit back and understand that, look, finding the race to the bottom with our technology stack is not benefiting us, right? Like, we may have been able to get this stuff on, I mean, you know, our call center is in India and it's folding chairs, and that's how, and they're answering phones that look like they were built in the 50s, right? Okay, that's cheap, and you pulled it off. Congratulations, right? But your user experience is trash, right? And people figure it out, right? And that's where, you know, you might have a lot of people coming in because you've got a cheap price, but they're going back out that other door the moment they have to talk to someone that they can't understand, and they're put on hold for 3 hours, right? And I think that is really understanding what kind of user experience you're, and I think that's at the heart of almost everything we provide, is how is it improving that customer journey? You know, like if you go to our website, it has a little, you know, roadmap, squares around it that basically represent our products. But at the end of the day, that's the story we're trying to tell, is that we try to orchestrate that experience. We try to layer on the value, and we're trying to bring it to more and more, you know, contact center platforms. But that's really where I think companies, when they really sit down and take a step back and see what's possible and how they can improve it, I think sometimes, you know, the light bulbs just keep going off in terms of, oh, you know, like, obviously that makes sense, or I would want that. I feel like we've never explained the services we provide to someone, and they'd be like, oh, I don't think there'd be a use for that, because they're all built on use cases. Because we had these big customers, like you mentioned, they came to us and said, look, is there a way to do this better? Can we improve, you know, how we're doing it, or, you know, all this? And we say, sure. And then we build it. So to us, we don't go off in an ivory tower and say, what would be something interesting to add to no, like, they kind of give it to us. Like, you know, for example, one of them was a power company, and they wanted not only the ability to schedule callbacks, but they wanted to do it by service. Like, okay, if you're going to dig in your backyard and want to check for power lines, schedule a callback for the team that knows where your power lines are buried. Okay, you want to turn up new service? That's a different team you're scheduling a callback. So we created this method, so that way, to me, doing a callback, but then having to make all the choices after that, you know, it's not as beneficial as being on the route exactly to who you need to talk to. And I think that's, again, that use case was built around them. Same thing with, you know, doing it on the mobile. We, you know, as you can imagine, if you get a call back from a number you don't recognize, you might be like, voicemail. So we started sending them little updates and said, hey, we're going to call you per your request in, you know, 10 minutes from this number, right? And then guess what? People start picking up the phone. That gets back to user experience. Like, you know, we could have said, oh, we're calling them back. Your problem, they don't answer. But no, we kind of took it one step further and said, look, we want to make it where, you know, it's a win-win for everybody. Like, the customers understand what's going on, you understand what's going on, and it's a pleasant experience. Right?
Yeah. I try to avoid answering the phone like the plague, man, because, you know, how many times, you know, do you get a call and it just basically is like propaganda for some, you know, we just went through the elections, right? That was pretty horrible. But secondarily, you know, like, how many, you know, calls do you get back? And it's like nothing. And then you hear a click, and then it starts ringing. You're like, what is going on right now?
Yeah. There's a lot of litigation around that component, right? Like, basically, you know, I think there's been companies that it's a crime. You know, the FCC started regulating it more, but it's a crime to basically do a massive call campaign where you call everybody and their brother all at once, and then you only got like 3 agents able to take the call, but they're guessing that most of them are not going to pick up. But the moment their guesses are wrong, and, like, you know, let's say half of them pick up, then it's like they freak out and are like, oh, okay, let's cue them. And they made that illegal, right? Because to me, that's like, because people don't like to wait in a line, but it's a whole nother level where you're creating a line and then shoving someone into it, right? And they're just like, out of the blue, they're like, what's happening here, right? Like, I don't understand, like, you know, why, you know. So they definitely, you know, when I worked at LiveVox, that was a big thing for them, was they did a lot of collections, and that was highly regulated industry, and you had to be very smart about how you did it, who you did it to, when you did it. So yeah, I definitely can understand frustration. And another thing people have to understand, the reason that it's happening more nowadays is, in the old days, even to be able to harass people on that scale, you had to be a big company with a lot of money, because you had to buy, you know, teleco services that were very scalable, and you had to buy very advanced equipment to do this. And now both of those things they've just dropped. Like, it'd be like the average person trying to buy a battleship back in the day. Like, nobody could do it. But nowadays, it's like the cost of a rowboat, right? And they're just like, well, heck yeah, I'll get in on that. So you could buy these SIP trunks for next to nothing. You could buy a ton of them. And then you can also buy these really cheap dialers, that'll just start pounding people. And the moment you could do that for cheap and then just walk away, like, oh, okay, we pissed a bunch of people off. Okay, on to the next, like you could just, because the old ones, if you want to turn up an outbound number, you had to commit to 12 months. Like there were no short-term contracts. Sometimes it was longer. And it took 2 months to even get it going. And, there was a lot of provisioning that was happening. And I think that, again, that prevented a lot of these bad actors. But now it's like you can spin services up immediately. You could tear them down just as fast. And you've got things that'll call, everything, and then again, that's how come it's just becoming rampant, and I get them. SMS is becoming notorious for that too. Like some SMS campaign about whatever. Like I always love when they pretend to be different companies. Oh, Bank of America, they need you to someone's hacked your account. Please give us your password now, or whatever it is. Whatever ridiculous premise. I get those all the time. And again, you think, well, how do they not stop that? It's basically like almost trying to stop a bad website. The moment that somebody squashes it, they just turn up a different number.
It grows up somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it pops up.
Let me ask this. So we've all gotten these calls, kind of the robocalls, right? Do you think at some point conversational AI will be able to simulate a person so well that like they could do outbound with these sort of things?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so let me just give you some of the backstory. So one of the things they've done to make AI really smart is let's say you're a company, especially a large company. Let's say you have 10 years of audio recordings for 1,000 agents. If you can do the math on that, right? That's a mountain of data. And they've gotten smart where they said, look, we're going to take all of this recorded audio and we're going to transcribe it, right? So now it's in text. And then we're going to do things like find out, okay, like of this transcribed audio, we're going to look at let's just make a simple one, our top 20 questions that we've ever been asked over 20 years. Now it gets tricky when the answers change, right? But let's just keep this example simple. So you've got your top 20 questions over 10 years, 1,000 agents, right? So now the system knows exactly how to respond, and you could even make it, sound like whoever you want, right? You can make it's not robotic, not like 𝗔𝗊𝘁 𝗧𝗿𝘁 right?
Yeah.
So it'll respond back. And I feel like, and so that's one part of it is if you can give it a really deep knowledge base to pull from, and it's your Q&A. So there's no one typing in, okay, if they ask this, I want you to say this, because that's where it gets tedious. And that's where, again, it breaks down because the number of questions someone can ask you is almost infinite, right? So you pull from this as a starting point, right? So no one's had to program anything. It's just transcribed. Now it's knowledge based. Now this is the Q&A, right? And you've let it stack rank. So because you're going to have some anomalies, right? Some people will answer one way or the other, but you go with the majority. Then you also add in the tuning factor, right? Where you're telling the system, okay, anything less than an 80% confidence level, send to an agent and then they can validate it, right? But you get smarter over time. You get smarter. I feel like, those systems honestly are already in place on some level today, and you don't even know it because it is like you said, it is truly a computer. You have no idea, and they've worked out all the kinks, right? Especially the edge cases. That's normally when you catch them. When you say something, it's not quite sure what it is, and then you could tell it's a computer. But yeah, some of them are pretty slick. They pride themselves on saying, hey, if it's a normal conversation, we're really tough to beat, right? Now, obviously, if you just like yell out pumpernickel and see what it does, right, it might not know how to respond to you. But if you basically are someone turning up a new service or someone calling to get some kind of support, they've checked all the boxes. So yeah, I have no doubt it's happening today. Where it first started happening, you never knew it was chat because they never said you're talking to a bot originally. They just said, hey, you want to chat with us? And then you start talking. Then there were certain things that would give away it's a bot. Like one of the clear things would be if it just started huge chunks of text.
Right.
Sometimes you would be like, it seems like a computer, even though, you can do that if you're an agent, you'll have these predefined things, but sometimes you can kind of get a vibe for it. But trust me, there's tons of people that have had a phone conversation and a chat conversation with a computer and never known. That's happening today. Now, the quality, again, is where it can get, especially if there's these long waits, right? And then it responds. Like I think you can sometimes pick up on the nuances, but it's getting way better. It's getting way better. Every year it's improving.
Well, I don't want to remove the human factor. I think that, that needs to be maintained. But if I can efficiently get in and out of the system, I have no problem with the fact that it might be a technology doing it. I think what the point you're making is maybe the misrepresentation is really the problem, right? Like almost like the
Yeah,
deep fake of voice or the deep fake of, text bots or whatever. I think is where, do you think that's like an ethical issue?
I
I'm
mean, it
curious.
could be. I mean, I know even before bots, one thing that would piss a customer off is if you, instead of putting the agent's name, you just said a company, right? Let's
Right.
just company X. And then it actually got transferred between a bunch of people, and you didn't know it. It just said company X the whole time. And then you said something, and then who was like, "What are you talking about?" And you're like, "Well, I already set up here," and he didn't look at the whole transcript before it got transferred.
Yeah.
That would piss people off too, because they were like, "Hey, I thought I was dealing with Bob." Like sometimes it would just say Bob, and you're like, "All right, Bob's been helping me for a while now." Well, no, Bob's actually a shell game between 5 different texts that have all been jumping in and out. So that's why a lot of companies have decided they all show you that it's moved, right? And sometimes they wanted to hide that because they didn't want to seem disorganized. Like, hey, I had one problem. I had to talk to 7 people. Like, that doesn't seem well run. So they wanted to hide that fact, but I think it pissed more people off than it would. Can it become an ethical thing? Yeah, I feel like, again, this is where, corporate ethics gets involved. I think for sure it could become an ethical question in terms of how you're representing your business. And especially if you're trying to pride yourself on, like, hey, we're the company that cares, and then you look behind the scenes, it's a bunch of robots running it, right? Like, I definitely think if you're trying to project,
we're the company that doesn't care. Let's talk about our robots.
yeah. Well, heck, Ruby receptionists, I hear that ad all the time. Would you rather talk to a human, right? And I get it. I think those are valid points. And to me, my answer is always just like you. It depends. Like, I've definitely had some frustrating conversations with automated systems, even though, I help, build them. But at the same time, I've had great experiences, right? Where I'm like, I'm so glad I didn't have to go through all of that mumbo jumbo. Like, I just clicked 3 things and then it happened, or said 2 things and then it happened. And I think sometimes it's almost like you want to be, as a consumer, ahead of time, you want to say, look, my issue is so complicated, no amount of automation is going to help me. So please just send me straight to a person. Now, the problem, though, right, is that everybody would want to choose that option. That's why they don't do it. Right. So I think that's the rub is, going into it that, look, I want a refund on this bill because you guys, I don't know, set fire to my fence. Like, there's no option for that, right? Like, that's not going to be option 12. Did we set fire to your fence? Well, yes or no, right? Like, it's not going to happen. So you kind of have to fight your way through the system, and yell agent like 12 times, agent, representative. And finally it'll route you to a person, right?
Well, this has been a really fun conversation, Steve. I always like to circle up and bring it home with like 3 do's and a don't. And I kind of gave you some context for what I wanted you to focus on. So I really wanted you to share with kind of like the people who are developing this technology out there, like, and the service providers that are in your industry. I wanted you to share kind of 3 things that, especially since yours are all built off of, customer case studies, like what you're doing, right? As an example, what should they seriously be considering, for, let's just focus on the user experience, because that's what you were talking about. Like, what should they be doing? 3 things. And then one thing that they should stop doing that is really not, even if the intentions are good, are not, helping, I guess, the industry.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start with this thing they should stop doing. You should stop, like, basically thinking, the best, what the best experience for your customer should look like. You should never start with that premise. I feel like you've already failed. Like, your customer should tell you the best system, right? And again, not to say you can't have a system, but if you think this is what they want and they tell you something different, that's where you're misaligned. And I'd say 80% of companies out there think the customer wants this, and that's all of them. They have totally this very unrealistic understanding of what these customers want. And I think that's, to me, I start a lot of times when I'm consulting with them, I start with the fact that, look, let's say they're trying to add a service, social media, for example. They say, do you think our customers want that? And I say, I don't know your customers, right? Like, some customers could love it. Some customers could hate it. I don't think all of them are going to switch to it. I'm not crazy, but you need to do a good job of finding ways to, get that out of your customer. Now, I'm not saying, you instantly go to every door of your customer and force them to fill out a manual survey, right? But you got to do it somehow. And then maybe you give them incentives. Hey, look, you filled the survey, Amazon gift card or whatever. But I feel like you need, when you make a decision, it needs to start with the customer in mind, right? And this is where I feel like if you have been a very closed shop and the customer's opinion on anything has been not been part of your DNA, that's a big transition to make. But that's that the dues to me is starting with that. Like, because I think, people I see that make tech decisions all the time, I always say, well, what are you basing that on, right? Like, like why do you think that? And a lot of times they just think it. They're like, oh yeah, they're not going to use that, or they don't like that, or my customers aren't going to whatever. And I'm like, have you talked to them? Like, especially when I think it's hilarious is when they literally have millions of customers, billions of people. I'm like, you just know that's what they want or don't want. Like, that's, to me, is ridiculous, right? So I mean, my first dues is definitely, start to really create a system that you can constantly get feedback through a website, through an email. I feel like, it's not, and and also even just in that, like, don't send them an email with 400 questions, right? No one's going to fill it out. Like, I get that all the time. Like, it just keeps going and going and going. And you're just like, oh man, I wanted to help you, but this is just arduous, right? I say, you got to do it in little, spurts, right? Like, that's where I like it, where, you finish a phone call and it says, please rate the agent 1 to 10. Then you hang up. People will tolerate that, especially if you tell them it's coming, right? I think that's a big part of it. And then how would you rate the experience, and heck, I'd especially, to me, I'd said, if they don't do a callback immediately, survey them when they're in the queue. They got nothing else going on, right? Say, hey, how would you rate, did the menus make sense? Or do you think something's missing? And if 90% of them say something's missing, well, guess what? Something's missing, right? I think it comes down to, you say you want customer experience, but you never talk to your customers about what they're looking for. So that's a big do. And I'd also say, look at, really try to understand your customer in the sense of what you're charging and the value, they're bringing. Because that's another one where I just feel like there's some companies, they do a great job, but they're priced so high above the market that I'm just like, how are we ever going to make any traction? Like, I think it's a great story, but the only people that can justify it are the ones with, 20,000 seats, right? You gotta find a way to meet in the middle, right? And understand, like, sometimes it's just breaking your product apart. Like, okay, I understand, like, your premium product gives you these 5 things, but maybe we do one with just 3. I'd say coming up with creative ways to package and sell your product. I see companies that have a ton of success that way. I think, heck, Zoom was a perfect example of ones that were just like, let's just give it away on some level to kind of get that exposure. And you saw how well that took off, right? And I think they really exposed the fact that if you make it difficult to even try your product out, it's going to be a tough sell, because these companies, they want to sample it for a small amount of time. They want to personally see the ROI before they make the big investment. And if you think it's going to get done with just, here's the demo, okay, give us all the money. Like, I just feel like that's, for the longest time, that's been the mentality. And I don't see it, right? I feel like you've got to do more to kind of help build it in, or some, maybe you say, okay, we're going to do a proof of concept. And then if we do all these things, it's going to pay off. I get it, because there's complexities, there's expenses involved in implementing it. But I think the ones you've seen successful in my industry are the ones where the barrier to entry is low. And then you just keep trying to add the value on later. If you just have these huge upfront costs, I mean, you got the best sales force in the world. It's so hard to get over that hurdle, right? Because these companies are very leery about what they're committing to, what they're doing, and especially with a web service, because to them, that's one of the advantages. Hey, I can sign up, see if I like it. I don't like it. Great. Like, we don't have to, fire half my staff and close an office. Like, we just move on to the next one, right? And I think understanding those barriers to entry, coming up with creative solutions, I'll put all those on the do list, because, technology is great, but if you don't have a good use case and you also don't make a good ROI story, it's tough. Then they just see it as a nice to have, like social media for the longest time, they felt like it was a novelty. Voice is similar. They say, oh, it'd be nice if someone could talk to me on Amazon, but I don't need to have it. Right. But I feel like where you could really open their eyes, you say, hey, look, your top 3 competitors are doing it. So what does it say about your firm? Right. Like, that's a very, I think that's kind of where you can get them. But, again, some of these companies, I'm amazed at how they think they're a pioneer in some industry, and you're like, no, 20 other people are doing this, and guess what? They're charging less than you. Now, yours might be slightly better, but is it worth 3x? Like, no, like you, and I'm amazed. Like, so many companies are like this. Like they have no clue what the competitors are charging. They have no clue that the competitors are doing, proof of concepts, demos. They have none of it. They're just like, this is how we've always sold. This is how we will sell. We'll fight over some numbers, but we're not going to change any of that. And, that is definitely to their detriment. And it seems like a no-brainer. Like standing back, you're like, well, clearly you should do that. But man, if you know anything about corporate culture, sometimes it is so difficult to get people to understand and to change how they're doing business. You'd have a better chance of changing what they're selling sometimes just because the culture has been built around this machine, and you're telling them, hey, this is not a good way to go to market. Amazon, I'll throw them out there. They are kings of this in terms of like the contact center product, for example, because they'll go to your site and they won't just show you a demo. They'll literally start building it in your location and say, hey, try it out. Tell us what you think. You like it? Okay, buy it. I mean, nobody does that.
Right.
Nobody. Right. Everyone else is like, okay, here's how it would work, even though this isn't your actual tools and all this other stuff is hypothetical. But, put yourself in the mindset of this. And then, okay, you want to do it? Okay, we're going to have a 90-day implementation. We're going to do these projects are huge before you ever turn it up. All this time and effort's going to be spent. And then you're rolling the dice, right? Like, is it going to work out? Right. So they remove a ton of that. And I think that more companies need to look at that. Like, how can we get it in there on a small scale quickly, let them see some value, and then build from there. And I think that's a very revolutionary in my business, right? It's some businesses I feel have been doing it from day one, right? But other ones, it is painful in terms of the amount of, difficulty to get it stood up. And therefore you can't really have them try it. And therefore, whatever.
Yeah. All valuable points, man. And I appreciate you bringing it home with those. I think we're at an hour and 15 minutes. This has been a good conversation, Steve, and a fun one for sure. Hey, if people were trying to, thank you, reach out to you. Sorry, I'm going to say thank you for coming on the show. If they were trying to reach out to you, work with you, chat with you, follow you, or something more nefarious, where would they find you?
LinkedIn's probably my preferred method.
Okay.
I think I'm on Twitter, but again, it's probably the easiest way. Stephen Faust, and I look for my shining picture here. I'm sure there's more than one Stephen Faust online, but maybe only one of them works at Swampfox. I mean, that'd be a good one. I'm on LinkedIn just about every day, I'd say, and that to me, I feel like I don't have to directly give them my cell phone, right? But if we hit it off, I can progress from there. But yeah, no, it's been good talking to you. And if you ever want to have me part of a panel or whatever, I'm more than happy to contribute. I think honestly, like these types of conversations, I'm really hoping they penetrate not just the consumers, but like aspirations to penetrating the companies, right? Because I think they need to understand how they're doing business and how they're treating their customers and what impact that can have, positive or negative. Right. And I think the more businesses we get doing that, it's going to benefit everyone. So.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And, I think you're talking about things that we all experience each and every, if not every day, every week for sure. Whether we're calling, the pharmacy to get our scripts, as you mentioned, or, we're waiting on a package, or we're just asking Alexa, to order some bananas, like whatever it is, right? Like we're interacting with this technology every single day. And so I love your perspective on really making it all about the customer experience, because, that's what's really pushing the technology along. Putting us in your queue for your experience may be unique and special to you, but that's not the way people's brains and really lives operate. So I like the perspective of it, and I certainly like the coaching you were able to give the industry on how to do it better. So thanks, Steve, for coming on here, and also for the little dab of humor I always get from you every time we talk. So.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure, Troy. I appreciate the invite, and happy to be here. So thanks again.
Awesome. Hey, and if you're still listening now, and I'm sure you are, make sure you boop that like button for my man Steve here. Connect with him on LinkedIn, and you can also find us on all the places. Whether it's on Google Podcast or Spotify as well, if you're rolling around in the car. So hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to hearing and seeing from you in the comments. And I hope you stay connected for listening next week. All right. Talk to you soon. Take care.